Morning. Nita, I always do a little bit of stage managing here. I'm gonna give you this chair. I'm gonna put this away so we can like see each other. And
Sure.
Okay, Tom, stand up over here for a minute. Everybody, this is Tom. I just learned something. So as many of you know, and I didn't know, this is Child Cancer Awareness Month. He's wearing the gold ribbons. It's impressive. I wish we all had them here. I feel badly I don't have mine, but we all do in spirit, okay? So thanks, Tom, for wearing it and reminding us this morning. So Nita, we're here in a way to focus on what to do about a pediatric cancer, what the new approaches are. I know you've been in this business for 25 years. I'm really interested in sort of time swaths and how things were 25 years ago and what you're looking at today when you see as in your role, and you're playing such a pivotal role with the National Cancer Institute with new therapies. What are the biggest leaps, strategic leaps you've seen in the 25 years you've been in this?
Oh, well, that's a great question, Steve. I mean,
she gave it to me before I came out here.
No, with pediatric oncology, it's sort of the example or set the stage for all of oncology, because early on in the late 1950s, with a tumor that occurred in kidney called Wilms tumor, they showed, pediatric oncologists working with radiation oncologists showed how you could use surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation to cure these children. That before, when they were diagnosed with a Wilms tumor, they were told that there was nothing they could do. At the same time, after that, with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, showed that the activity of certain drugs, to the point now with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, over 90% of children are cured of it. There are certain groups that have a much higher risk that we're still working on. But to really address your question, it's been very exciting to see all these changes. But at that time, particularly with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, we're using therapy for anyone who was diagnosed with this disease, with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. What we're doing now is that we're able to subtype the different types of cancers into different molecular types. And this enables us, with the new targeted agents, to be able to target those molecular defects.
So this is in the personalized
Right.
therapies,
So this is where precision medicine comes to play in. So before, it was anyone who was diagnosed with this type of tumor, like medulloblastoma, was treated the same way. Now, with molecular tests to identify the certain subtypes of medulloblastoma, that's not the case. And that's where Pediatric Match is really helping us further identify, if we can identify in a child or adolescent's tumor a specific molecular defect and target it with a drug that is specific for that defect, will it make a difference?
So let's pause there just for a minute. Pediatric Match, which you just dropped in there, is a new platform. It's a new initiative of NCI. So why don't, for our audience, we have a lot of folks watching on camera, give us a quick treatment of Pediatric Match and what you're trying to do.
So Pediatric Match stands for Molecular Analysis for Treatment Choice. And what happens is that a child or adolescent between the ages of 1 to 21 who has their tumor, it comes back after being treated with standard therapy, or it responded initially and continued to grow, a piece of the tissue from the recurrent tumor is analyzed for genetic abnormalities. And in this study, not only do we identify the genetic abnormalities, but we also have, right now, we have 8 treatment arms that with different agents that will target different genetic abnormalities. So not only is it identified in this study, but also if the genetic abnormality has a drug that will target that, the patient is then eligible to be treated on this study. So this is really the first time where a study of this size in children and adolescents with recurrent tumors is being done, where they identify the genetic abnormality, and then they can get the drug as part of the study. In the past, or what has been happening is that there are different centers throughout the country and even in Europe where they do the test to identify genetic abnormalities, but they don't have the drugs as part of it. So they recommend to the patient that they can be treated with a certain drug. Well, the problem with children and adolescents, so drugs, many of them are investigational, so they're not available. Here they are available in the study itself. And actually, some of the drugs that are included in Pediatric Match haven't been tested in children before. They've been tested in adults, and we know what the safe dose in adults is for that specific drug. However, when we were designing Pediatric Match, we worked with experts from the FDA as well as from COG and the NCI, and it was agreed upon that if we knew how the drug worked in adults and we knew what kind of toxicities to expect, that we could incorporate it into Pediatric Match. So for some of the treatment arms, these drugs have never been used in children before, but we will monitor those children very closely and we know what side effects to expect.
I've noticed in some of your commentary out there that you've given a lot of praise to some pharmaceutical companies that are partners in this.
Yes.
How does that work? Why is their partnership in this important? And I guess the second piece of it is, I'm sure the pharmaceutical industry is not a monolithic. What would you like to see more of in the private sector in making this work?
Well, Steve, I have to say, when we first started on this developing Pediatric Match, we had a list of different classes of drugs that we wanted to make sure to include based on knowing what abnormalities are in tumors in children and adolescents. And so I didn't know how the pharmaceutical company would respond. It's been so gratifying to see all of them have been very anxious to participate in Pediatric Match, and their participation means that they're involved with helping us identify the molecular variants that they think their drug will target, and then providing drug for the study. So it's been terrific to see the response. Now, there's been a few that have said, no, we really don't want to put it in pediatrics yet, but by far, most of them, the majority, and particularly when we've gone after specific drugs have been very willing to work with us. And that's a unique feature of Pediatric Match because they're from different pharmaceutical companies, and to be able to include all these different drugs under a single study and to make them available is really the unique aspect or why we can do Pediatric Match.
I'm sure someone will challenge this out there when we get to comments and questions. You're welcome to. But as I've read it, it's a lot of the big gains in pediatric cancer research people credit to the National Cancer Institute. And if it was not for that, the economics of research, the economics of developing new therapies simply aren't there in the private sector. And that's one of the criticisms of the ecosystem of research and therapy and how to do that. And so you're, in a way, NCI, and what you're doing is fixing a market failure in the research and development side. And I'd be interested in sort of hear from your perspective inside whether you see it the same way, whether you think the marketplace can, in fact, reform itself in any way to kind of focus on children as well as the kind of broader cancer spectrum?
Well, that's a really interesting question. It has a couple different aspects to it. First of all, fortunately, pediatric cancer is not as common as cancers that occur in adults. So the National Cancer Institute, supports numerous studies that are done in pediatrics, but they also support the Children's Oncology Group. And you're absolutely correct in that we wouldn't be where we are right now with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, with Wilms tumor, with neuroblastoma, if the Children's Oncology Group hadn't done controlled trials, randomized trials, and where we had well-defined endpoints and found out what works and what doesn't work. On the other side of your question, so, we have small numbers. Individual institutions can't do those types of studies. You have to work together in a group. So that's great, and that's been going, that's an example for all of medical oncology. We wish that adults participated in clinical trials like we see in pediatrics. But the other issue is the pharmaceutical industry, in that you're right, they don't make the drugs for the pediatric tumors because the market isn't there. So that's where, when you mention reform or, increasing awareness or engaging the pharmaceutical companies to make this a higher priority, is so important.
When you are out there, I have there's a nice little brochure you can all download from the internet on this pediatric match trial. I'm a pretty layperson in this field. It says about 200 to 300 pediatric patients are expected to be screened each year. To me, this sounds small, but am I wrong? Is this large? Is this a small number? And how, as you develop and kind of see where this goes in these kind of 8 arms of work and research, how does that then come in and basically spread through the treatment system in the United States?
So that's a good question. 200 to 300 may seem small, but you have
because
to...
there are about 10,000 a year, right?
10,000
right.
But these are patients whose tumors haven't responded to standard therapy that have come back. These are only solid tumors. They're solid tumors that includes, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Right. It includes histiocytoses.
So this is a much larger share of
you have to remember, it doesn't include the leukemias. And acute lymphoblastic leukemia is the most common malignancy that we see in children. So the leukemias aren't included in pediatric match. And so there are certain groups of patients, like Wilms tumor patients, who have a very good outcome. We don't expect many of those patients to be enrolled. So 200 to 300, it really reflects the tumors that have come back, and particularly within the solid tumor.
I see. And so then as you find, I suppose, find good stories in the precision medicine arena on this, how do you then take that and basically transmit that knowledge broadly? Because one of the things frankly, it comes up in a lot of the cancer and health forums we do, is the unlevelness in literacy, particularly among practitioners in the country. So how do you move from the excellent work you're doing and kind of deal with some of the literacy unevenness in the country when it comes to dealing with people in Kansas and Oklahoma, these big gaps that you sometimes find in people's access to sort of smart therapies that they can have access to and that they can afford?
Sure. So pediatric match is intended to be a screening study. So our plan is that 20 patients are enrolled on each treatment arm. If we see a response, and the response is defined as shrinkage in the tumor or stabilization would also be a reason that a patient could continue on the drug. If we see that in 3 out of the 20 patients, that's of interest to us. And so if that happens, then we will expand the patient population for that specific group. And if we see it, particularly in one type of histology, one type of cancer, we'll expand it in that type of cancer. But it will also give us an idea of where we can further test this agent. So if we see it in a certain type of cancer, but patients are on it for several months, they have a good response, and then the tumor starts to grow, well then perhaps it needs to be combined with another agent, either a chemotherapeutic agent or another targeted agent. So our plan is, if we see evidence of activity, then we plan to design additional studies to further, see how we can incorporate this into therapy. And ideally, we'd like to incorporate it up front when a patient is diagnosed, not just in the recurrent setting.
In a little bit, I'm going to be talking with Congressman Brian Higgins, who's been one of the co-chairs of the Cancer Caucus in the Congress. He's a big champion of immunotherapy, and I've been interested in your reticence, if I can call it that, or your caution about immunotherapy in some of your comments. That immunotherapy is coming up everywhere as sort of the new wonder approach, and you're saying, there's some not so wonderful parts of that. Can you share with us what you're trying to put on the table?
Well, immunotherapy don't get me wrong, Steve. I think immunotherapy is great.
It's my job to thrive in darkness and cynicism.
And it's a very exciting area. The issue with immunotherapy, which is a little disappointing from the pediatric oncologist standpoint, is that we just haven't seen the same responses in children and adolescents where it's been tested as they've seen in adults. So I think it's just challenging to us because we want to find out how can we use immunotherapy. In some of the initial, with CAR T cells in ALL, that's been shown how that's made a big difference in the relapse setting for ALL. With dinutuximab, which is a chimeric antibody with neuroblastoma, that's been shown. But those are really the successes in pediatric oncology. So the challenge now is to see what do we need to do, or how do we need to combine it so it will be active in children and adolescents. Fortunately, because of the Moonshot, there's actually money that's been allocated to study this more in the Pediatric Immunotherapy Discovery and Development Network, in which we're asking investigators to submit plans on how they can investigate this more. How can they identify immunotherapeutic targets in pediatric cancers? What are the agents that can be used for immunotherapy? And why is it that a tumor may respond initially and then all of a sudden evades the immune system? So those are all areas that we need, that are different from what's been going on in adults, that we really need more information so we can use immunotherapy.
I want to go to the audience here in just a minute, but one other question, I'm glad you mentioned the Moonshot. I'd love to know whether you're finding that effort of the Cancer Moonshot, Vice President Biden's work, useful or having any impact at all. It would be interesting. And what I'd really like to know also, just in this, I met this woman, I don't know where she's at, Beth. Beth worked with Dr. Seibel. Are you out there, Beth? There you are. We were in the elevator for like 30 seconds together. And I said, who are you? And she says, I'm a nurse practitioner, but I work with Nita Seibel at some point. And you could just sort of tell she was really into this subject. And I'm interested in the human side. I mean, oftentimes when talking about science and therapies and 8 arms and pediatric match, I'm just interested in how you kind of keep grounded at the human level and remember that you're dealing with kids. I know that may be an unfair question, but I think it's important.
It is important. Personally, it's because of my strong faith and balancing that. That's essential. But, I decided to go into pediatric oncology versus medical oncology because the cancers that we see in children and adolescents are different than the ones you see in adults for the most part. And even though it's terrible when a child dies because of their cancer, in pediatric oncology, there are many more that survive or are cured of it. But, just the whole journey that a family goes through, it's a privilege to get to, stand right with the family, the patient, and everyone, your whole medical staff, such as your nurse practitioners, such as Beth, to help take the family and the patient through this journey. And it's very gratifying now when I get notes about college graduations or getting married, and to see some of these children, knowing what they went through when they were diagnosed, and now seeing them going on with their life. But that also brings up the whole issue of survivorship, because that's really essential too, because our treatment, we have to keep that in mind. Not only do we want to cure them of their cancer, but also to make sure that they can have the highest quality of life.
Thank you. That's beautiful. Thumbs up on Moonshot, thumbs down?
Oh, yeah, okay, thumbs up, definitely.
Let me take any quick comments, questions from you. Yes, right over here.
My name is Susan Finston. Oh, sorry. Hi. My name is Susan Finston. I am a co-founder with biotech pioneer Nita Chakrabarty of a microbiome company with lead oncology peptides. It's not on.
It's not on.
Let me see if I can get another mic.
I guess we're bringing you a new mic.
Thank you. Okay, this is better. All right, so Immunotherapy has late preclinical stage microbiome oncology peptides, and we're focusing on the SMAR1 biomarker, which is a master cell regulator and is associated with so many cancers, where particularly for adult women, breast cancer, late stage is associated with total degeneration and disappearance of SMAR1. So my question is, it's so wonderful to hear about how you're working with the larger established companies. What's the role for an emerging microbiome company like Imrita that has a strong focus on the SMAR1 biomarker, which we believe can really hold less immunogenicity, less toxicity than the immuno-oncology options?
Thank you.
Susan, that's a good question. You know, we're not limited to the larger pharmaceutical companies. Many of the drugs, several of the drugs are from very small companies that we work with. So our criteria for investigating agents that we could bring into pediatric match is really we need a biomarker so we can identify those patients who would benefit from the drug. And so that's where our conversations usually start. And we are open and willing to talk to companies to see, you know, if they think their agent would be applicable to pediatric
So it's driven
match.
by the biomarker and the agent, not the size of the firm.
Oh, no, not at all.
Yeah.
Right.
Interesting. So that's not one last question here. Yes. Hi. Good morning.
Hi, I'm Jan Hamilton from Aspen, Colorado. Steve, I gave you a ride to the Ideas Festival about 5 years ago in my white.
I remember, Jan. Good to see you.
Good to see you again.
She did. She picked me up. It was, you know, and
well, this vagabond just walking along the street of Aspen.
Yeah.
You were in front of the Pepke House, as I remember.
Right.
Okay, good to see you again. Now, I have a PhD in human nutrition from LSU with a postdoc at Georgetown. My work is in cancer aftercare because I cannot treat, diagnose, or prescribe. I'm working with Dr. John Mendelsohn and Barak Agarwal from India on nutritional markers in after the chemo, radiation, and surgery. What can we do with these children to keep the cancer from coming back?
Thank you. So it's kind of a survivorship and what patterns, it was going to be an ongoing part of the conversation here today, but do you have quick thoughts on that element?
Actually, through the Childhood Cancer Survivor Study, they have collected DNA on all these patients, and they are now analyzing them at a molecular level to see if there are certain genetic characteristics that suggest that certain patients should, for example, not undergo radiation or are more likely to develop a second malignancy. I think they can also apply that to nutritional areas as well. So we'll see what type of data we get back to see what the molecular, you know, if we can identify certain patients that would benefit from a certain nutritional supplementation after therapy. But this is an area, you know, that is very new for pediatric oncology. So we'll just have to see what the data really show.
Nita, thank you for... We got to, unfortunately, Joe, we got to finish. Yeah. Thank you very much, Jan. Nita Seibel, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Steve.